InvestorIdeas.com podcasts.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another InvestorIdeas.com podcast, following cannabis news, stocks to watch, as well as insights from thought leaders and experts.
Today's podcast was sponsored by Kelowna-based Lexaria Bioscience Corp., trading on the CSE under symbol LXX and on the OTC as LXRP. Lexaria has developed a new disruptive drug delivery platform called Dihydrotech. The company's patented technology changes the way active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, enter the body orally. Masks unwanted taste, eliminates the need for sugar-filled edibles, reduces time of onset, effects are felt within 15 to 20 minutes versus 60 to 120 minutes, avoids first-pass liver metabolism, increases bioabsorption by 5 to 10 times. The company's Dihydrotech technology is patented protected for multiple APIs, including CBDs, THC, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as ibuprofen, nicotine, and fat-soluble vitamins. Learn more about Lexaria at www.lexariabiosciences.com.
Today we'll be finishing our two-part interview with K. Lance Anderson, where we'll be discussing the different patent laws as well as intellectual property laws facing the cannabis market today, and his thoughts on the state-by-state versus federal legislation.
Not changing it at a federal level, it almost puts a, I would say, a cap or a glass ceiling on sort of the market, just because there's so much regulations then that everyone has to go through transferring from state to state. So it makes it difficult for a company to expand to a certain level or to get to a certain element of funding.
I would agree. And I also think that, there are limitations in how, based on your point, there are limitations on how a company can take advantage of international opportunity on a global basis when it's under that glass ceiling. And so I think you're right, and I think the amount of, I'm a lawyer, right? So from the legal perspective, the amount of effort it takes to go, especially in, some states, it's overwhelming. And it's perhaps meant to be that way, but, once this all kind of falls into place and everyone is, watching an industry reach a new level of maturity, to have that level of detail required for compliance is always going to be a burden, and I think it'll continue to hold back U.S. companies that are operating in that way.
What would you say are some of the positive outlooks you're seeing in the industry so far as regulations and the legal aspect of getting a company from, let's say, start to middle growth? What are you seeing? Is there massive innovations that are taking place, and what are some examples that you can sort of note?
Well, I like to think about drug delivery. Okay, so the introduction of platforms for delivering drugs into the market have caused a lot of these small to medium-sized companies to affiliate with some of those platforms. So they're bringing in scientists that have been in the pharmaceutical industry, or they're affiliating with companies that have drug delivery platforms to maybe peel off an application for cannabis products. And what you're seeing there is, so think about the cannabis product as an edible, all right? It is an oil, and it has to be metabolized by the liver, called a first-pass metabolism requirement. And it's, in essence, poorly available. So it's not a very efficient process of orally administrating a cannabis product. So what you're seeing are innovations to address that. Maybe it's more efficient uptake, so higher bioavailability. Maybe it's stability. Maybe it's the rapid administration, the rapid onset of the desired effects. And so fast-acting formulations that are able to manipulate how your body uptakes that cannabis product, those are coming out. And so you're going to, someday have the ability to, within 10 minutes, ingest something orally and have that become induce effects. On the other hand, there are antagonists that are out there, and I think what we're going to see is, the ability for a customer to consume something for lunch, for their lunch break at work, and enjoy themselves, and then be able to turn that off. So the ability to really focus in on having, what I call designed delivery mechanisms meet, everyday products and everyday users. I think you're going to see some really cool stuff. And so these small companies are able to really enhance their value proposition by showing they've got distinguishing features like that. And so, I'm seeing a lot there. I'm sure all your listeners are as well.
Yeah, I think that's the benefit of the pharmaceuticals joining into the industry, right, is they do have that technical experience with being able to sort of have something fast act and fast relief and fast stop.
Fast stop, exactly. And so, and not to mention, now remember, I have a genetics background and I was involved in the plant breeding industry. I think we're only scratching the surface of the potential of this plant. It is a very workable plant. It is easy to manipulate. And I'm not talking about genetic manipulation necessarily, but there are ways to have traits enhanced. And some of those traits may involve upregulating the expression of some of these cannabinoids that are less available. Like it may take a whole field to bring the amount of CBG to the table to make a dose. Well, what if we, focused on the germplasm that's being involved, and this could be at the medicinal level in particular. I think there's great application there. You can really enhance the profiles of those hard to find, scarce, not very available cannabinoids and see what they do. And you're going to come up with all sorts of cool effects or abilities to treat certain conditions. So,
with regard to that,
genetics.
Yeah, with regard to, I guess, the plant manipulation, I know strains are, they're a very valued commodity in that industry. The potency of your strain, the growth rate of it and everything. As far as the actual, I guess it'd be the intellectual property rights or the patenting of a strain, how does that work, and how are you seeing that? Is that a big issue for people of sort of maintaining their strain individuality where no one else can sort of copy it?
Well, now you're getting into the great conversation, and that is, freedom and access to diversity and germplasm. And then on the other side, protection of someone's innovation, right? And so I don't want to politicize the whole thing, but there are certain rights that a breeder will have, breeder's rights. And so there are tools like a plant patent, for example, which protects against the asexual propagation of the claimed variety. All right? So they can be utilized if there are new varieties, or as the cannabis industry calls it, as new strains, right, which should apply to bacteria and yeast and not plants. Plants are cultivars or varieties. But new varieties that are developed may have really cool profiles, right, that have uses. And I think you see the opportunity for breeders' rights, such as plant patents, to be taken advantage of. But that doesn't necessarily mean you won't have access to those innovative new lines. I think what it does mean is that there's some reasonable amount of protection from others asexually propagating that plant. And so it may position a lot of these breeders to benefit for a while. But at the end of the day, can you go and protect the genetics of the cannabis plant from the context of certain traits? That's going to be hard to do, and I think the efforts of the open movement, the open innovation, the open access movement, there are various groups wanting to make sure and sequence and release, certain genomes. That will have put a little cushion between the innovators and the protections they should be or ultimately will be able to take advantage of. Long story short, you will see people take advantage of that, and there are tons of utility patents being filed on formulations and traits of the plants themselves. But I don't think it's going to get to the level of the soybean market being 90% controlled by Monsanto, right? It won't get to that point.
Okay, so I guess follow-up question, do you think that Monsanto is going to ever try and get into the cannabis industry?
It's weird. I have a lot of history with the agricultural industry, and it's really interesting. I think you're seeing more reception from the pharmaceutical companies than you are the agricultural companies. Although there are efforts, and it may not be the Monsanto, or I guess they're retiring that name after the Bayer acquisition.
Yeah, they're now something
it
else.
will be right. It will be interesting to see based on the robust distribution and R&D capabilities of those companies to see how far they go. But honestly, there's a little bit of a stigma still in the agricultural industry, the traditional agricultural industry, with regard to the cannabis industry. And a lot of that is you're seeing talent go across, or efforts to get talent to go across in the agricultural sector. It's a little more traditional and perhaps less receptive than you would see from the pharmaceutical perspective. So it's more likely that you'll see talent coming across from the pharma industry than traditional agriculture. Although there are lots of examples of folks coming from other breeding programs into cannabis or other agronomy programs into cannabis, and so I don't want to discount the impact of the agricultural industry. I just think it's interesting to see that it's lagging a little bit compared to others.
Well, yeah, thank you for all the information. It was especially interesting hearing just about sort of the whole strain breeder bit there, just because that is something that I've wondered about a lot. It's just what's going to happen with that, because I know, like I said, the strains are so highly valued, but then you also want the information available for other people to be able to utilize.
Absolutely. And so there are examples with international treaties on plant variety protections. I think the way the agriculture industry dealt with that is they avoided it and ended up filing utility patents on, varieties or lines. And that still happens today. So I think what we're going to need to see is how patenting, not plant patents and not plant variety protections, which allow for certain research and reuse, replanting exemptions. That's very important. But I think the interesting thing will be to see how the patenting occurs, utility patents on plant traits and lines. And I think if we rely on the freely accessible genome of the cannabis plant as a whole to be considered public data, then I think you're going to see the impact be much more limited with regard to these broad sweeping patents that, frankly, single-handedly allowed companies like Monsanto to get that market share.
Yeah.
Because you just couldn't develop those plants at all without their tools.
Yeah, I mean, that is the one benefit of the blocks by the state-by-state legislation, and the fact that it's not every country in the world that, has legalized this or allows it to certain levels, is that it does sort of keep some of the more aggressive, giant mega companies out of the game.
Absolutely.
It's for them.
I agree.
It's not enough benefit quick enough for them to jump in, so they're sort of just staying in the background. Well, there's a lot of more middle and micro companies popping up all over the place, which I think creates a lot more innovation.
Right. And lastly, I think on top of that, you've got a natural governor on the market with regard to acceptance or rejection of genetic modification, right? And that has been, for a long time, the focus of the, ag bio sector is to enhance genetics through genetic modification, okay? And so what that does is it keeps us down in that traditional breeding category where we're looking for traits based on breeding programs that are established and, what we would consider to be less controversial. And so that natural governor, because consumers aren't going to accept genetically modified wheat. It just won't happen. And so I think you'll see it naturally balance with regard to innovation and the protections of those innovations with, in contrast to people having access to strains they want to have access to.
Yeah, it is interesting that I've found that the cannabis industry is probably one of the most aggressive about the organic element of everything. There's no acceptance of synthetic weed. That's any of the companies that have tried to do that have gotten thrown down into the gutters pretty fast. And there's a big element where people are always trying to test the sort of elements of every plant to find out if it is 100% organic. And if the extraction method used anything that was unorganic or unnatural. It's a weird thing that a drug industry and something that's looked at as maybe not as there's still a stigma attached to it, is actually the one that's the most strict about their quality of product.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and I think you're seeing that even with, like you were mentioning, the extraction processes and that the advent of distillate as a source material for processing oils for vaporizers. That the argument there is that it's cleaner. It doesn't have the impurities that a butane or CO2 based solvent system would maybe have. And I think you're seeing those are selling points. Those are well received by the industry, and so
and even by the consumer. The demand for purity and the highest grade, purest, most organic product is sort of paramount in everyone's mind.
Absolutely. And what that equates to is getting back full circle to our conversation on intellectual property, making sure those controls are in place so that if you're processing and selling in a state, it's going to be at that level of quality for your customers so that you never have to worry about someone pointing at your product saying that's impure or that's, flawed in some way. And so once again, it gets to the point of, the states need to do their part in ensuring that there's enough analysis and certification of the products, but then the companies themselves need to work hard to ensure the same. And I think together you'll start to see opportunities where customers can show up and have verified profiles and reporting on the purity of their products.
Thank you so much, Lance, and it was great talking to you.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure visiting with you.
That's all for today's podcast and part 2 of our interview with K. Lance Anderson. As always, Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment.